Hey, loves, as always, thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Real Talk, where I get to have real life, raw conversations with incredible people from my circles and communities who overcome challenges and create amazing. I am always so inspired by our guests and their incredible stories. And I know there are so many other places that you can be. And I'm so grateful for you being here with us today, either watching the replay, listening, watching. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. And please share, like, and subscribe so we can continue to bring you our incredible guests. Today, my guest is truly amazing. I cannot wait for this conversation with her. Julie Kliegman is a writer and editor in Queens, New York. She wrote Mind Game, an inside look at the mental health playbook of elite athletes. Julie is a former copy chief at Sports Illustrated, and her work has appeared in outlets including The Washington Post, Book Forum, Slate, The Ringer, BuzzFeed News, Vulture, The Verge, and Washington Monthly. Julie has interviewed hundreds of top athletes over the years and is the leading voice in the sports media world that covers mental health. Please help me welcome Julie to the program today. Hi, Julie.
Hello, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. I loved the book,
Thank
and
you.
it was super insightful for me because I am, one of those people that definitely, look at athletes for inspiration. And my children and my husband are always have sports on, and so over the years, I've learned to be inspired by these athletes that we watch, to like give me that motivation to move forward. And reading Mind Game, it was so insightful because even in the book you said we put these athletes on a pedestal and don't even realize because they're so elite and they're just so high performing, like we forget that they're human beings like the rest of us. So it was eye-opening for me to read the book.
I'm so glad you found value in it.
I really did, and I would love to share it with my my children who are really into sports and want to do the best they can, but to show them like, okay, you could be human as well.
Yeah.
One thing I loved, and it really caught me from the beginning of the book, was where you wrote, I mean, you started the book with, to the psychiatrist who told me I'd be dead by now, I'm not. Like, that was, again, the book starts like that, so powerful. And I want to start, our show with that. And if you can speak on that.
Absolutely. I don't have personal experience being an elite athlete, but I do have a lot of personal experience with mental illness. And unfortunately, a lot of times in our culture, at least in the US, that comes along with like experiences with a lot of providers who are like subpar.
Yeah.
Um, when you do get to see people, and it's not that easy to get help for a multitude of reasons. But I was hospitalized in a psych ward. I chose to admit myself about 6 years ago now, maybe a little bit less. And afterward, I was meeting up with the psychiatrist who had been seeing me before I was hospitalized, and his tone like totally changed now that I had been hospitalized. And it was totally stigmatizing, and he was dismissing my concerns about a medication I was on because he's like, well, you're just going to kill yourself anyway. It was very dismissive.
That's not only dismissive, that's, I mean, who says that? Like
Right.
who makes him, God to say
Right.
something not only dismissive, but arrogant and rude?
Definitely.
I could say that. And so when you heard that, how did you respond?
That's a good question. I mean, the first response was just like anger, and I guess there's still a little bit of that anger in the dedication. It originally had like an expletive in it, even.
Right?
Um, and so I think it took me a while to process it. And even though I immediately knew that he was wrong, it took a while to become something I was proud of. And I was like, look, this dude thought I couldn't make it, but here I am.
I love that because and I can relate to that because I had a therapist that met me when I was 19 and later admitted that when she met me when I was 19, she believed that I would never make it. I was going to go down the same path of dysfunction,
Wow.
And then when I had a health scare, I also had a practitioner tell me that I would never be the same again. Now,
Wow.
would you say, and they were both wrong. Now, would you say that hearing those words from the psychiatrist motivated you to get to where you are today?
I definitely think so. Yeah, it certainly wasn't his intention, but I think, if you think about that stuff long enough, you realize that the issue isn't with you, it's with the person who
Right.
is sharing those like awful views with you. And so it is eventually something I learned to use for motivation. Yeah.
I love that. And I also learned it was really just based on their own experience. And
Mhm.
and eventually I learned, um I guess forgive, because it, like you said, it wasn't meant maliciously, but still it was inspiring. And
Yeah.
after that, I know that we spoke and you said that you're afraid, how after being admitted, how am I going to continue my writing career? And it was after
Yeah.
that you became the copy chief at Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, I think when you go through something like as traumatic as a psych hospitalization, it really does feel like world ending for you, like, or at least it did for me. And it was kind of like, well, what is my reputation going to be? How are people going to see me differently? Will I be able to have a public facing career? But then, yeah, within about a year of that, I was able to get a job at Sports Illustrated, a year or two maybe. But yeah, and that just felt completely gratifying.
That's amazing. And in that year or two after that incident, what were some things that you did to help yourself, become healthier?
Well, I definitely did a lot of work in therapy. I did a lot of work with a psychiatrist, a different psychiatrist. Uh, and I just really leaned on my friends, my community, and yeah, just a lot of positive self-talk that,
Yeah.
I could do this. I am a value to people. And I did want to work hard and continue my career and my life.
And what an amazing example you are. And again, getting back to the book, what motivated you to write the book?
Well, part of it was definitely my own experiences with mental illness, which started when I was in high school. And part of it was my love of sports. I loved watching sports when I was younger in middle school and high school. I played sports. And I kind of like you, I have looked up to athletes and, I started wondering what makes them tick
Mhm.
and what keeps them going. And because I think we do look up to them for good reason. And around the beginning of the pandemic, my first article for Sports Illustrated was about how athletes were dealing with COVID-19 and their mental health. Because when you take a step back from training and competition, you don't have access to the thing that brings you joy, to the thing that gives you stress relief. And that can be really difficult on these elite athletes.
I can
So I
imagine.
think it was, yeah. So I think at that point was when I realized, like, hey, this could be a book.
hmm Well, so much happened, during that time. And you did talk about in your book, was it identity foreclosure
Yes, good
term?
memory.
um and how when they're not doing, they're not training or practicing, there's a challenge with their identity. Can you speak to us a little bit about that and how some of the athletes you interviewed were able to overcome identity foreclosure when the training or their career was taken away from them, either by injury
Yeah.
or retirement?
Totally. Yeah, that's a really common thing that athletes go through. A lot of times when you are really good at something from a very young age, your identity becomes wrapped up in that thing, and you sort of foreclose on other possibilities of your identity.
Love that.
And researchers have studied this in athletes in particular. And I think it's really about being proactive in realizing what your hobbies are, what the primary relationships are in your life, whether it's a romantic relationship, relationships with friends and family, relationships with teammates, maybe outside of the gym. So there are things you can do in advance so that when injury or retirement or, God forbid, a global pandemic hits you, you're not, you're not left wondering, like, who am I?
I love that. And I believe what you just said really can be useful to any one of us, because so many of us tie our identity to our work, that we
Mm-hmm.
forget that we are not our work. We are
Right.
our heart, our soul, our spirit. So I really loved reading that part, because I feel that, in my career early on, like, I've fallen into that trap. And you're right, like, if it's taken away, you just feel, lost. So I
Mm-hmm.
love that part in the book. What would you say was the favorite part of researching for Mind Game? Because you connect with so many athletes and so many different people. What was your favorite part?
It's a great question. I talked to so many people and looked up so many things, spent so many days in the library. I would say one of my favorite parts was actually researching the history of the sports psychology field. I just found that all so fascinating to learn, like, this history that was kind of like stop and start. Like, there wasn't a linear path to, like, us learning about or accepting sports psychology as an industry. And I think we could have been a lot better off a lot sooner, society and its athletes, had we kind of embraced this study sooner. But, we got there eventually, and with some quirky figures along the way. But
I love
I yeah, it's just, I think it's, when you're researching anything, I think it's really helpful to, like, know where things came from and why we are the way we are today.
I love that. I like to know, where did it come from and why we are. It's fascinating. And so, in your study of the sports psychology, what was something that came up that was most fascinating to you?
There was a hypnotist for a professional baseball team in the early 1950s, named David F. Tracy, that I had no idea about, but he wrote a memoir. I read it at the library. And he was, like, not a sports psychologist in the conventional sense. He, like, didn't really have any relevant degrees or anything. So he's kind of like this con artist sounds a little harsh, but I mean, it's just a quirky guy, and it's just interesting seeing what people's different perceptions of sports psychology and how to help athletes, like, how much they differ from each other.
Actually, I'm a trained hypnotist. I don't do it live, but I used to think, when I first heard about hypnosis, not just for sports but for entrepreneurs, I was like, okay, that's like a crack. That's like a quack.
Yeah.
However, I've learned that so many athletes do use the hypnosis and the visualization, and that it actually is very powerful and helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should be clear about that. Like, there are uh hypnotists who practice that in responsible, like, ethical
Totally.
ways. I don't think this guy was one of those people, but
Well, they
I guess I
probably won
wasn't
a couple
there.
games, right? Using
Yeah.
him. That's
Mhm.
And so, how do you think that sports psychology has evolved over the years?
Well, more people are studying it first and foremost, which I think is the most important thing. Is it's becoming more and more popular, and providers, I think, increasingly have an understanding of the line between mental performance and when an athlete just needs to improve their mindset to kind of improve their performance on the field or on the court, and when an athlete needs to be treated for mental illness. And those things are not mutually exclusive, of course, but I think that's a really important distinction that came up.
Which brings me to the question I wanted to ask you about this, because we talk about mental performance, mental toughness, and
Yeah.
I mean, what does mental toughness mean? And how does it correlate to better mental health?
Yeah, so I think mental toughness is a really interesting term. I looked into it in depth for an essay in Sports Illustrated a couple of years ago, and it's just fascinating because I think a lot of people, like pundits and journalists and even athletes themselves, misuse the term and kind of like use it as a value judgment of like, oh, are you tough enough? Like, can you hang? That sort of thing. But it's, as researchers told me, it's a real term with a real meaning, and it's about, it's kind of like the building block of resilience, you could say, like how you get from point A to point B to like accomplish your goals. Um, and so I think it's really important if you're an athlete to be mentally tough. But what it doesn't mean is that you can't be vulnerable. You know, you could still be open and honest about your struggles and still be mentally tough. Like these things don't have to exist in a vacuum.
What could that look like? What could that look like? Someone who is, mentally tough and resilient and is having, a bad week, day, month. What could it look like? Okay, I'm mentally tough and I'm vulnerable. What could that look
Yeah, I think, you know, you're going to the gym, you're putting in your reps even though it's a hard day, but maybe you're talking to your coach or your athletic trainer afterward and saying like, "Hey, I'm really struggling mentally. Like, should I take tomorrow off? Should I take a week off?" Just kind of like being honest about what you're going through, and but keeping those athletic goals in mind at the same time.
Now, how can we rest while keeping those goals in mind?
Well, I think a mental health day is a great thing. Like you know, a lot of people see that as slowing down progress or, you know, taking a step back, but we really don't have to see it that way. We can take time for ourselves, and that might rejuvenate you and make your journey a little bit easier even.
Absolutely. I believe in that 100%. And then when I, walk into one of the stores I go to and they have the Kobe Bryant Mamba mentality, and then I'm like, okay, Mamba mentality, but I'm feeling tired. It's also to remember that is part of the Mamba mentality, is to
Mhm.
really taking care of yourself in whatever way that may be.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, I mean, you've interviewed so many incredible high performing, athletes. What lessons did you learn from them that, we can apply in everyday life?
I think one of the most universal lessons that athletes will tell you about is creating a routine and sticking to it. And I
Mhm.
think that's especially important in times of uncertainty, to know, okay, I might be having a hard day or I might be injured, but look, I'm still going to walk the dog. I'm still going to go to the grocery store. I'm still going to watch an episode of my favorite show. I'm still going to get a little workout in, whatever it may be. I think routines provide an incredible amount of stability, and we can all really learn from that.
I agree with you 1000%. That's what keeps me going when I hit my valleys is some type of routine and getting out in the fresh air as well. That helps
Yeah,
me a
I
lot.
think that's great. Yeah.
So how can we as a society begin to shift the stigma around mental health, especially when it comes to sports? Because, like you said, we put these athletes on a pedestal and we look to them and we expect them to be superhuman, and they're not. They're human just like the rest of us and go through challenges like we do. So, how can we start shifting that narrative?
It's a great question. I think it's important to see them as human, like you said, and I think we can do that by remembering they're not superheroes, remembering that they have bad days, bad months, bad years, just like we do, and you know, leaving space for them to be whole people, just like athletes, like we talked about earlier, shouldn't foreclose on their identity if they can help it. We need to also leave space for them to like be more than just their sport or more than just their career in our minds. I think we can do that by reading good journalism about athletes that humanizes them. I think we can do that by, um, you know, simply like cheering them on and realizing that, you know, they're not always who they are on their worst day.
Absolutely. And also what I think is so challenging, which, comes up in the book as well, is, not only do they have this pressure on them as athletes to perform, however, they're also being, scrutinized for everything that that they do. And especially now with social media, like social media is relentless. It doesn't let up. So not only having the mental toughness to perform at their best, but also, you know, making an effort to shut out those distractions, because I can imagine, if an athlete's, doing the best they can, they see some string on social media, you need to also learn how to be thick-skinned to navigate that as well.
Absolutely, and social media, I think, it's safe to say, is a blessing and a curse. I think
Absolutely.
a lot of athletes do get a lot out of social media. They can express themselves, they can make sure a message gets across in the exact way they want it to. But yeah, there is a ton more pressure. They have to deal with comments, they have to deal with threats sometimes.
It's
Um,
crazy.
it's a minefield, yeah.
What I want to bring up is, you talked about Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan, and how they really helped shift the narrative when, I think DeRozan came out first, in a
Mhm.
social media post, and it was, people responded to it very well. And then Kevin Love started to come out, and then together, do you think that with the two of them coming out with how they were feeling and the challenges we're going with has helped open the door for other athletes to be vulnerable and share what they're going through?
Absolutely, because we're talking about 2 NBA All-Stars, and 2, like, very well-liked NBA All-Stars, and I think they have a lot of influence in the game that maybe they didn't realize they had until they opened up. But, hearing prominent figures like LeBron James, like the Warriors coach Steve Kerr, like, praise these people and really uplift them, I think was huge, and you did start to see other athletes, not even just in basketball, but across sports, kind of say, like, oh, I related to what they were saying. So I think every time a prominent person does come out and say they're struggling with mental illness, it does open the door for other athletes to do the same.
Yes, and definitely, for us, for the fans, just recognizing that, they are human just like the rest of us, and like you said earlier, give them some space, give them some grace, and
Mhm.
hopefully, with them coming out and with their vulnerability, that's also inspiring. Because I do feel, there is a stigma if you show up in a certain way, you know it's you hear the whispers. And so again, we need to really make that shift, because it's not healthy for us not to be able to express how we're feeling or what we're going through inside, and especially if you feel isolated and alone.
Right. Absolutely.
Something that surprised me that came up, is a lot of the athletes struggle with body image, which means there's, eating disorders. And what I
Mhm.
was talked about, as you wrote in the book, that how many there's really a shortage of providers that specialize, or even research that specializes in recognizing, eating disorders, and how to treat those types of mental challenges.
Yes, that's a huge issue because athletes with eating disorders, aren't representative of the general population of people with eating disorders, because usually in an eating disorder recovery program, your doctors would say, like, hey, no exercise, like that could be triggering, that could be a symptom even of your eating disorder. But when you're an athlete, again, it's like your way to relieve stress, it's a large part of your identity, and so
Mm.
you can't necessarily take sports and exercise away entirely, even when those athletes are struggling. But that's a hotly debated issue in that community right now. But there are so few programs across the country that are dedicated spaces for athletes in particular undergoing eating disorder treatment.
That's interesting to know. And I'm going to look a little bit more into that. I may have some information I'd love to send you as well. So I
Great.
thought interesting. So something else that came up that I thought was interesting, under the substance abuse chapter, was the use of ayahuasca. And
Yes.
the ayahuasca has just been, swirling around in my community for so long, and I've always been curious about it, and some people who've done it swear by it. So I wanted
Mhm.
you to speak on ayahuasca and how it is used, or how athletes use it and how it can help.
Yeah. So this is something that surprised me about the research. I first looked into it for Sports Illustrated a couple years ago, and then looked into it even more deeply for the book. And talk about things we don't have enough research on. It's, really psychedelics and elite athletes. Like, we don't even have enough research about psychedelics and mental health in general. But when
True.
you limit that to athlete populations, we have even less. But we do know that athletes are using psychedelics, most of them pretty quietly, because, some leagues it's against the rules, or it's at the very least highly stigmatized.
Mhm.
And they're using those for recreation and also for mental health reasons. So it can be really interesting to think about, because it's just a whole new layer of science that we haven't really unlocked yet.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm gonna keep doing my research because I've heard some great things, and then I've heard some things like, I don't know if I wanna be just, I've heard like you just are just purging and you just feel a
Yes.
bit out of control. So, but I loved how
Yeah.
you shared about that. And again, like you shared on so many, different things that a lot of people don't talk about. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, of course.
And so, do you think that, currently there are any themes or trends happening with mental health in regards to sports and athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think the general trend and the most encouraging one is that more and more people are simply coming forward.
Mhm,
Um, whether that's to journalists, whether it's like in personal essays that they author or co-author, whether it's on social media directly. And then I think the other trend we're seeing is with providers. Like, we're getting more providers who are women, or providers who are people of color,
mhm.
treating athletes, which I think it's so important to have people of a variety of demographics engaged in this work.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because also there's a different, there's an understanding for the culture, not that someone might not be a great doctor, but sometimes, you need to have that cultural understanding as well, for sure.
Exactly.
So is there a way that high performers can cultivate, the mental strength that's going to equip them for the valleys that they go through in life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think practice is the number one thing, just working on bouncing back after a tough day or a tough moment. I think performance psychologists are a great resource. They're not only just for athletes. I think they can work for anyone in a variety of like business related fields, for example. And I think it's so important to have someone, either a traditional therapist or a performance psychologist, in your life who can be unbiased and also like motivate you and help make you better.
And so what are some tools that you've learned that you use that you think that, not only athletes, but the rest of us can use as well? If you can share some tools.
Yeah, I mean, I think breathing exercises are a big one. Meditation doesn't really work for me, but it works for a lot of people. So I would say look into that.
Mhm,
I would say just pay attention to the way you're talking to yourself when you're performing, whatever performance means to you, and make sure that's a positive dialogue in your head.
mhm. I agree with all of that. So how do you feel about failure?
I mean, it's inevitable, right?
Yes.
So we might as well embrace it and try to learn from it.
So what has been, and I don't believe there's failure. I believe that it's all feedback. So
Hmm.
what's been something that you faced that you thought was a failure that really ended up turning into something great?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think I'm a very career oriented person, for better and for worse. So a lot of things that I've considered failures have been in my career, like not getting a certain job, or not being able to finish a certain article that I, really wanted to do, or getting denied to talk to like a famous athlete, things like that. But I think, really, like you said, failure is feedback. I love that. And to kind of just realize that new opportunities are going to come down the pike, and that, maybe something is a better fit for you. I found that so many times in my career.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that because it's so true. And again, in writing your book and working for all the different publications and Sports Illustrated, like you said, you've had to, reach out to so many, top athletes. How did you, get the grit to continue to, because there's a lot of no's that come down the pipeline, right?
Yes,
So how do
yes.
you overcome those no's and stay, in that grit um the knowing to get to the yes? Because it's discouraging.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really can be. In journalism in particular, you get a lot of no's, especially when you write freelance articles. You might have to pitch like 5 or 10 editors at different publications just to land a single story. And so I think what you can do is recognize when something is constructive criticism versus just criticism, and decide what you want to actually internalize and what you can let go. I
For
think
sure.
that's a huge thing of motivating yourself to try again.
So just not taking it personal, just understanding like this is part of the business.
Absolutely.
Now, did you always want to write for Sports Illustrated and be a writer growing up? Was that like your dream?
Yeah, I Sports Illustrated had been on my radar for a really long time, in part because they have a great kids magazine too. Um, and I didn't realize I'd end up in sports journalism in particular, though it makes sense because I always
Oh,
love sports. But I did always want to be a writer from a very young age, and I kind of realized that like novel writing is in a very impressive skill that is just not for me. I like writing about things that happened or that will happen or that people really said. And I am not, I feel like I'm a creative and imaginative person, but not in that specific way that you need to be to write fiction.
well, I mean, your work is amazing. The book was
Thank you.
amazing, and it's just so inspiring to see, see someone say, "Yes, I wanted to write for Sports Illustrated," and you did, not only write but became the copy chief, and it was after you had like this life crisis where you thought like, "Okay, I will never achieve my dream," and you
Hmm.
did. And I know we talked about, that psychiatrist probably motivated you, but what do you believe kind of built the foundation for you to continue to believe in your dream and move forward? Because so many of us just get discouraged. I'm like, okay, well, that's too big. I'm never going to write for Sports Illustrated, or I'm never going to be a professional athlete. So why even bother? What kept
Yeah,
you forward?
I think it really is that part of it is that conversation we just had about how to take no's and how to move on from no's. Um, and another part of it is just like the therapy I've been through and the supportive communities I surround myself with. Because not everything's going to work out, but you don't need 100% of the things you want to do to work out. You just need a decent percentage of them to be happy if you change your mindset. So I think it's
That's
about
so
keeping
true.
that in mind.
That's so true. And I always say when working with my clients, I'm like, okay, let's shoot for the biggest goal possible. And she's like, that sounds ridiculous. I'm like, it's not ridiculous, because if you shoot for, that New York Times best-selling title, then you land here. So always, shoot higher, because then you get closer to your goal. How has your life changed since you've written the book?
Oh, I mean, it has changed and also it hasn't, right? Like it feels like this huge milestone event. And then it's like the fuss around it kind of, for most books, unless they're like mega bestsellers, the attention dies down pretty quickly. So,
I
but it does feel like such an accomplishment though. And I want to make sure I'm reminding myself of that. And I love that I can have conversations with people like you where we can talk about what in the book resonated, and it just gives me a bigger platform to talk about the issues I'm really passionate about. So I'm really grateful for that.
Well, I'm grateful for it as well, because we get to have this conversation. I got to read the book. I got to meet you. I think you're amazing. So I totally
Thank you.
feel you on that level. And so, what would be, one last piece of wisdom that you'd be open to sharing when it comes to just, high performance and mental health?
Yeah. I would guess I would say, just to keep it simple, that everyone has mental health, whether you think so or not. You might have really good mental health most of the time, but you still have it. And it's still something to be attuned to and to care about and to keep feeding and nurturing.
And how can we feed and nurture it?
By doing some of the things we've already talked about, by working on those exercises, by seeing professionals, by reaching out to friends, by acknowledging your struggles, by reading
Mhm.
about other people's struggles. There's a whole host of things you can do, and it's just about finding what's right for you.
For sure, for sure. I know earlier we talked about routine, and I know that was my last question, but something else came up. You talked about how routine is so important. What's a routine that you use that helps you?
Yeah, even just like the simplest things like feeding my cat twice a day and setting aside time to play with her and
Like,
watching decompressing with a TV show, things like that. I've been going through Sex in the City for the first time, so that's been fun.
and that's I think what we miss. We miss fun, infusing fun into the day because we get so focused on the doing and the action that we forget
Mhm.
fun. Now, do you believe infusing the fun is helpful to our success?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you need to take breaks and no matter what you do, like you're not going to be at your strongest if you're just constantly chipping away at work or your goals, whatever they may be.
That's so true. And so a little bit of this and a little bit of that to, get us to our optimal performance level,
Mhm.
which is
Exactly.
different for everyone. I could keep talking to you forever. That's why I'm like, okay, next one. It's just again, I love the I love how this is coming out. We can be high performers and we can be vulnerable. It's not this or that. It can be
Yeah,
both and helping to shift the stigma that mental toughness is always just go 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 because that's not humanly possible. It's not sustainable. It's not.
absolutely. Mhm.
So thank you so much for joining me and for the book. I had a great time reading it. I've learned so much. It's helped me shift my perspective on so many different things, and I'm so happy that you're able to join me. So for those that are watching or listening, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me on social media at JM Kliegman. That's Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram. I'm also at www.juliekliegman.com, and my book is available online wherever books are sold.
Perfect. And I will definitely will have your information and the link to the book there. And thank you so much for joining me. It was so fun because I could be here with you for hours because I love this topic. And for those of you
Yes.
watching and listening, thank you so much. I know there are so many other places you could be. So I appreciate you. Like, share, and subscribe so we continue to bring incredible guests like Julie to our show. Wishing you all an incredible rest of the day, and we'll see you soon. And hang on with me, Julie.
Mhm.
Thank you all.